I'm taking a brief break from the world of science to do a quick book review. And the book I recently picked up was Cowards, What Politicians, Radicals, and the Media Refuse to Say. And it's written by this gentleman right here, Mr. Glenn Beck. And you may have noticed there's a little barcode on the cover. That's because I actually picked this up from the library. I was not about to spend money on a book by Glenn Beck. Now this was his latest book. It came out in 2012, a bit before the election. But it's not really about the election. It's about a lot of different things. And I'm sort of a secret fan of Glenn Beck. Not a fan in that I agree with almost anything he has to say, but I just think no one does crazy like Glenn Beck. I mean, you've got other figures who are pretty nuts, but they don't quite match Glenn. And I was a little disappointed because in this book I expected a lot of crazy and I just got a lot of dumb. Now the book itself is pretty poorly written. It's trying to sort of match the way Glenn speaks, his intonations. It doesn't always work when in text though. For instance, there was one joke. There are a lot of little jokes. They're almost never funny. But there was one joke where he's talking about libertarians, and he fancies himself one, and he mentions that he has a joke where he talks about, and I'm going to more or less quote it here, people think libertarians are just a bunch of guys who ... I don't know ... trade cocaine for prostitutes. And it doesn't really make sense because you're writing a book. If you want to stop and think about what you're going to put next, you can actually do that. You don't have to write as you're thinking, and that's just the way it comes off as. If you were reading it, it would make sense, but in a book, not really. We're still thinking, he's not a writer. You know, maybe you're being hard on him, and it's the one really heavy criticism I have for how it's put together, just really poorly written, but he has, 10 writers working for him. There. Those are all the people who wrote this book. And 2 editors. And it still reads like crap, which I think is unforgivable. But let's talk about the actual substance. I'm talking too much about the style. The substance. There are chapters here ranging from the invasion of Sharia law into the U.S. to how George Soros is controlling everything. It's what you would expect in a book, and it's a little frustrating to read because I'm not up to date with the Glenn Beck narrative of how the world works. And he often assumes that you just know who that Acorn is bad or the Tides Foundation is pure evil. I know why people hate Acorn. I'm not always too clear on why people hate the Tides Foundation, but he doesn't explain it, and there's a lot of things he doesn't explain. He'll often say, he mentioned these no-go areas in Europe, where it's basically a lawless land controlled by little Muslim communities. And he quotes a German police commissioner saying there are certain parts of the city he doesn't even go into. Of course, he doesn't say where this German police commissioner is from. He doesn't even give a name. He just has this quote. And I actually looked up the source. It's a German website, so I don't speak German. So I guess I'm out of luck. I'll just never know who said that. But I did look up the whole concept of no-go areas, and to give you an idea of what those are, they don't exist, first off. There are no regions in certain European countries that are controlled by Muslims and that the police and fire department are afraid to go into. The few websites that corroborate it are pretty impressively racist, and it seems that these are mostly just special neighborhoods that are set up by the government where they have affordable housing for immigrants, and the reason the populations are so heavily Muslim is because there are a lot of Muslim immigrants moving to Europe. And these are the only houses they can afford, but they are still under the various laws of the countries around Europe. But Yeah, that's just the kind of book it is. It's not very well thought out, and it finds the evidence it needs to prove the point it wants to make, whether or not that point is actually reflective of reality. My favorite little bit by far is the fact that he mentions, because you know he loves his conspiracy theories, he talks about how Nixon had the exact same name for his economic policy in 1968 that Lenin had in 1922. They both had the exact same name. What are the odds, right? What was the name of this new economic policy? And it was literally New Economic Policy. You could probably find dozens of leaders who introduced a new economic policy and called it New Economic Policy. But the fact that Lenin and Nixon had the same name, well, now it's Comrade Nixon. And you really get a lot of that throughout the book. And still, I will, if you can get it without paying for it from a library, for instance, I still recommend at least reading some of the chapters because I think it's a valuable tool to practice your own argumentation skills and to deconstruct what often amounts to nonsensical reasoning. It's not enough, in my opinion, to just disagree with someone. You should be able to show why they're wrong and where they're going wrong. And what's most shocking of all, I kind of save this for the end, but there are a few instances where I kind of agreed with Glenn Beck. I know it's weird. It shows that a broken clock is at least right twice a day. And in particular, when he started talking about how we need to pay more attention to the drug war in Mexico and the violence that spills over. And also the violence in Mexico itself. It's something that the U.S. drug policy has an influence on, and he made that point quite well. Well, fairly well. He also mentioned that the drone strikes he's not terribly fond of. He's not fond of them killing American citizens. I'm personally not fond of them killing anyone. That being said, well, my own position is a bit more nuanced than that, but they were two instances where I thought, wow, he's actually talking some sense. Of course, he seemed really confused because he's sort of talking about how the cartels in Mexico, maybe they should be classified as terrorist organizations. And then the very next chapter, he talks about the absurdity of the war on terror and how everything can be classified as a terrorist. So he's contradicting himself. In one instance, there was a paragraph where he seemed to be arguing with his own ideas. He would say, so what next? Should we possibly call the Mexican cartels terrorists? What about bank robbers? And he just kept going on. It was like, but I thought you were saying before you thought the Mexican drug cartels were terrorists. Now you're saying calling them that would be an overreach? Or what are you saying, Glenn? I asked that a lot throughout the book, particularly towards the end where he gets very confused and starts contradicting himself a lot. Or at least, perhaps not contradicting, not really having a clear position on things. He also talks about how he's not a shill for certain parties, but then pretty much just talks about the Republicans and how they can be saved and improved upon. Talks about how he's an independent libertarian, but then he just sticks to conservative ideology. He's a man of many ideas, clearly, and it'd be nice if he stuck to a few and explained them coherently instead of jumping around and being a complete mess. But overall, I say check out the book if you can get it for free. Otherwise, you're not missing much.